Okay.
So why would we care? So we have a map. How are we going to use this? I think we have to back up again to what we're doing here, what we're talking about. We said that the world revolves around patterns. If we can see a pattern, then we'll get closer to life, we'll get closer to truth. And then the bulk of the patterns that we've seen usually revolve around tangible things, but we haven't been able to explain a lot just with the tangibles. In fact, the big aha is that the intangibles are really determinant to the tangibles. And that the intangibles, the most important intangible is our culture. Our culture actually affects humans to the point of it determines how we evolve, what is right versus wrong. And if we extend that thought to a normative state of culture, if we can map out some sort of we would imagine to be a natural harmonized state of this pattern of culture, then we would be able to look at our current state and say, how far off are we from this?
Right.
How can we get closer to that?
Yes.
So that if we hit that natural state, then we're going to grow.
Right.
Grow in a real way.
So you could have a real plan based on a gap analysis and
see what based on the stuff that's the most powerful.
Yes.
I think sometimes people are willing to admit that culture is very important, but I can't see and touch it, and I can't measure it. I mean, I can try to measure it with a million questions here and there and come up with some sort of a complicated analysis, but it's always too complicated. What we're trying to suggest here is that there is a way to measure it.
Yes.
It's not a finite way. It's not saying absolute, but it's talking about tendencies, and it's talking about balance and harmony, and it actually functions around your role and the values that support that role, as opposed to just your outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, just as for instance, the research is done now on what is the optimal parenting culture it's in, and so are the results, and it's all measured now. Yeah. And mind you, not 3 people in the world know it, but it can be done.
Yeah, and I mean, what we would predict based on that, you use this model, is there's a certain culture that they'll spend all that time analyzing it, that we could start with at a high level to say, you know what, you have to create a safe environment.
Yes.
And there's certain outcomes of that safe environment that are measurable, and whether it's safety, mobility, skills, health, all these things that you can throw into that. So really, why this is important is, for one of what I think is the first time, we can actually fairly quickly look at an organization, understand where it is now versus what it really wants to be, or what role it wants to have.
Yes, because you also don't have to do millions of questionnaires and things like that to do this, do you? I suspect you can get a sufficient body in the room, and using this very simple outline, red, green, blue, you can start to get a sense as to where everything is in the end of the day.
Well, it's as simple as being able to truly understand what role you want to be in society, as an organization, or as an individual, what your authentic role is.
So is that where a lot of our stress comes from? In that, if you're not aligned to who you really are, if you're in a role that's not really you,
that's
part of it?
I mean, that's going to be one of the first gap analysis. There's two from an organizational standpoint. If you are thinking you're doing a role, if you have if you want to be this certain role, yet your culture is not supporting that role. Right. Then you're not going to be successful. There'll be a gap. Everybody, and it right to the point where the people you're trying to influence won't trust that you're good at what you do. It will not. There are some times you can throw extra resources into that to sustain over the short period, but ultimately you will fail unless your alignment. We talked about that flow of your organizational culture is and your leadership is the same as what role you want to hold. Now, from an individual basis, you could extend that. We have all these filters in front of us as we've been told what's right and wrong when we're growing up. We don't remember most of the things in terms of how we're conditioned. But if we find flow in our life in some level, and we find a way to be able to continue that, then we won't have stress.
Right.
We will be at peace. And, most of the medical world would agree that you'll have a lot less dis-ease, when you're in this state. Now, unfortunately, our society has to line up to this too, because if I had learned that, geez, I'm really good at nurturing, but I can't afford my house
Right.
being a nurturer because everything's turned transactional, and now my mortgage payments are so high that I have to work.
Yes.
Now we're finding an underlying stress
In
in society
in
that
society.
individuals get sucked up into, and I mean, we have tremendous stress.